The moment I walked into the Harrington Grand, my own building, my name literally engraved on the cornerstone outside, the doorman looked me up and down and pointed me toward the service entrance. "Delivery's around back," he said. I was wearing a gray cardigan and jeans, no makeup, hair in a low ponytail. I had driven straight from a site visit at our Denver property and hadn't bothered to change. That was my first mistake, apparently. "I'm a guest," I told him. "The rehearsal dinner for the Callaway Voss party." He looked skeptical, the kind of skeptical that takes years of practice. Name? Tessa Langford. He scrolled through his tablet, found it, looked at me again like there had to be some mistake. Then he stepped aside without an apology or even a nod, just a slight shift of his body that said, "Fine, go ahead, but I'm watching you." I walked through the lobby. I had personally approved the renovation for 18 months ago. The marble floors were the exact shade of cream I'd argued for against 3 different contractors who wanted to go darker. The pendant lights above the bar, those had been my idea too. The whole space felt like something I'd built from the inside out, because I had. And right now, none of it felt like mine. My younger sister Bree's rehearsal dinner was already in full swing in the private dining room on the 2nd floor. I could hear it before I reached the stairs. Laughter. The clink of glasses. Someone's high heels on hardwood. I stood in the doorway for a moment before anyone noticed me. Bree was beautiful, the way she always was at events. Lit up from the inside, the kind of person who made every room feel like it was happening specifically for her. She was laughing at something her fiancé Colt was whispering in her ear. His family was spread across the long table like they owned the place. They did not own the place. I did. My mother spotted me first and gave me the look she'd been perfecting since I was about 12. A quick, tight smile that meant you're late and you're underdressed and please don't embarrass me. I smiled back and found my seat at the far end of the table, the one tucked closest to the kitchen, the one that had clearly been an afterthought. I had been an afterthought for most of my adult life when it came to family events. It wasn't malicious, exactly. It was more like I didn't fit the picture they were trying to take. Bree was the one who had done everything right in the visible way. Married young, then engaged again after her divorce. Always in the right outfit, always with the right people. I had spent my 20s working, quietly, in ways that didn't photograph well. Colt's mother, a woman named Vivienne, was sitting at the center of the table with the posture of someone who had decided before arriving that she was the most important person in the room. She was wearing a cream blazer and pearls and had the kind of highlighted blonde hair that requires significant monthly maintenance. She had shaken my hand when I arrived, looked at my cardigan, and then turned away mid-sentence like I had ceased to be interesting. That was fine. I was used to it. What I was not used to was what happened about 40 minutes in, when Vivienne's daughter, Colt's sister, a woman named Ainsley who worked in real estate and had opinions about everything, leaned across the table during a lull in conversation and said, quite loudly, "So Tessa, Bree tells us you're in hospitality?" She said it the way people say sanitation when they want to sound polite. "I am," I said. "Hotels, right? Like you work at one?" I looked at her. I thought about 14 different ways to answer that question. I chose the simplest one. Something like that. She nodded like that confirmed whatever she'd already decided. "That's fun. Good tips?" Someone at the table laughed. Not unkindly, maybe, but not kindly either. My mother looked at her salad. Bree looked at Colt. I picked up my water glass and took a slow sip. Here's the thing nobody tells you about having money that isn't visible. People will fill in the blank themselves, and they will fill it in wrong, and then they will be very comfortable in their wrongness. I had learned this a long time ago. I'd stopped correcting it somewhere around year 3 of owning my first property. There was something useful in it, the way people showed you exactly who they were when they thought you had nothing to offer them. Vivienne had spent the last 20 minutes trying to redirect the conversation toward Colt's family's real estate portfolio, which was apparently substantial and centered in Nashville. She mentioned it 4 times with increasing specificity. The commercial properties, the residential developments, something about a mixed-use project downtown. Each mention had the texture of a business card being pressed into my hand. I was not going to take the bait. What I was going to do was enjoy the lemon sole, which our executive chef Renata made better than anywhere else I'd eaten on the eastern seaboard. Ainsley was not done with me, though. "You know," she said, cutting her fish with the precision of someone making a point, We actually looked at buying a property in this area last year. The market's really competitive. Colt's dad almost pulled the trigger on a hotel, actually. But the numbers didn't work out. I said, do you know who owns this one? The Harrington? We heard it's privately held. Some investment group. I tilted my head slightly. I've heard that too. We asked the manager earlier about touring the conference space for a potential event next spring, and he said someone from the ownership would have to approve it. She laughed like this was mildly absurd. So mysterious. Like who runs a hotel chain and doesn't have a public-facing presence. It's a little bizarre, honestly. Some people prefer it that way, I said. She studied me for a second. Then she smiled and turned back to her brother. I excused myself shortly after the main course and took the elevator up to the 4th floor, not to my office. I keep that on 7, but to the small management suite where my general manager, a very competent man named Frederick, was sitting with a tablet and the expression of someone who had been waiting for me. Ms. Langford, he said, I didn't realize you'd be attending personally. My sister's rehearsal dinner, I said. How are we running tonight? Smoothly, mostly. The Callaway Voss party made some adjustments to the dessert course last minute. How last minute? He paused. 3 hours before service. I looked at him. Chef Renata managed it, he said quickly. She's not happy, but she managed it. Of course she had. Renata had been with me since the 2nd property. She could execute a 7-course tasting menu with 48 hours notice and still make it look effortless. I made a mental note to add something meaningful to her bonus this quarter. Anything else? Frederick hesitated. The event coordinator for the party, the one the family brought in, not ours, has been directing our staff in ways that aren't consistent with how we operate. Meaning, she told one of our servers that his presentation was embarrassing and threatened to have him removed from the event. I set down the glass of water I'd been holding. Which server? Marcus. He's been with us 4 years. Where is Marcus now? Still working the dinner at his request. He didn't want to make a scene. I thought about Marcus, who I knew by name and by his habit of leaving a small origami crane on the linen of any guest he knew was celebrating something. He'd been doing it since before I acquired this property. I had kept the tradition specifically because of him. Tell Marcus I'd like to speak with him after service, I said, and find out who the event coordinator is and flag her file. I went back downstairs. The dessert course had arrived. Individual flourless chocolate tortes that Renata had clearly put real thought into, garnished with something bright and seasonal. The table had warmed up in my absence, or at least gotten louder, which sometimes passes for warmth. Vivienne was mid-story about a charity gala she'd chaired in Nashville the previous spring. It involved a silent auction and a misunderstanding about table arrangements that she was recounting with more drama than I suspected the original event had contained. I sat down quietly. Ainsley was on her phone. Bree was leaning against Colt's shoulder, listening to his mother with an expression that I recognized, the one where you are paying attention to exactly enough of what's being said to respond if necessary, while also thinking about something else entirely. I knew that expression because I had worn it at roughly 1,000 dinners in my life. And of course the woman had no idea who she was talking to, Vivienne was saying. That's the problem with people in service roles. They don't do their research. I took a bite of the tort. It was perfect. Tessa. I looked up. My mother was watching me from 2 seats away with an expression I couldn't quite read. What do you do exactly? She asked. Not cruelly, just genuinely uncertain, like she'd been trying to piece it together and kept coming up short. My mother and I had never been close in the way that some mothers and daughters are. We were fond of each other. We showed up. We called on birthdays. But there was a version of my life she'd never quite been able to follow. The version that had started when I was 24 with a line of credit I probably shouldn't have qualified for, and distressed property in Columbus that everyone told me was a mistake. I had turned that property around in 14 months, then I bought another one. I'm in real estate, I said. Hospitality real estate, mostly. She works at a hotel, Mom, Bree said, not unkindly, but with the careless shorthand of someone who hasn't been paying attention. Vivienne turned toward me with fresh interest. Oh, you're in acquisitions? Or operations? Both, usually, I said. She tilted her head. For which group? There was a pause. The table had gotten slightly quieter, the way tables do when they sense a shift. Langford Hospitality, I said. Vivienne's expression didn't change immediately. Then it did. A small flicker, recognition trying to organize itself into something coherent. Langford, that's the group that holds the Harrington chain? And a few others, I said. You work for them? I founded them. The silence that followed was a specific kind of silence, the kind that has texture. Ainsley looked up from her phone. My mother set down her fork. Bree's face did something complicated that I chose not to analyze in real time. Colt, to his credit, said, "Wait, seriously?" in a tone that was genuinely surprised rather than performatively skeptical. 7 properties currently, I said. This one's the flagship. Vivienne laughed, the kind of laugh that buys time. Well, I had no idea Bree never mentioned. I don't really talk about work at family events, I said. It tends to take over. Which was true. It was also true that Bree had never asked. What happened next happened quickly, the way things do once a certain kind of information enters a room. Vivienne's posture adjusted. Ainsley put her phone completely away. My mother looked at the centerpiece. Bree looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her face in a very long time. Something like wonder, or maybe just the recalibration that happens when you realize you've been holding an entirely wrong picture of someone. I didn't feel triumphant. That's the honest part of this that I want to be accurate about. I felt tired, mostly, and a little sad. The kind of sad that comes from realizing that nothing about you has changed except what someone now knows about your bank account. I excused myself again after dessert and took the elevator all the way up to 7. My office at the Harrington is not large. People always expect it to be larger. It's a corner room with floor-to-ceiling windows on 2 sides that look out over the city, the downtown grid lit up at night, the river visible in the distance if you stand at the right angle. There's a desk, 2 chairs for meetings, a small couch I've slept on more times than I've slept in the guest suite on the 9th floor. On the desk is a framed photo of the Columbus property the day I got the keys. I'm 24 in the photo, standing in front of a building that had a roof leak and a mold problem and a parking structure that the inspector described as aggressively optimistic. I'm grinning like I've won something. I sat in my chair and looked at it for a while. My phone buzzed. Frederick, the Voss coordinator, her name is Petra Gill, approached 3 more staff members tonight with complaints. Marcus says she told him his name tag was crooked. He was not wearing a name tag. I wrote back, "Please pull Petra Gill's access to our events coordination system. Effective tonight. Draft a letter." Then I went back downstairs because the dinner wasn't over and because I had decided there was one more conversation I needed to have. I found Vivienne near the bar, holding a glass of something sparkling, talking to a woman from Bree's side of the guest list, who had the politely trapped expression of someone trying to exit a conversation gracefully. I waited. When the other woman slipped away, I stepped in. "Vivienne," I said, "do you have a moment?" She turned with a smile that was now about 40% warmer than earlier in the evening. That was the math of it. 40%. I filed it away. "Of course," she said. "Tessa, I hope you didn't take anything earlier as—" "I didn't," I said. "I want to talk about Petra Gill." A pause. "My events coordinator? She's been directing my staff in ways that aren't acceptable. I've had her removed from our vendor list." Vivienne's smile didn't disappear, exactly. It became more careful. "I see. I wasn't aware she'd caused any. She told one of my servers his name tag was crooked. He wasn't wearing one." I let that sit for a second. I understand she was hired to make sure the evening went smoothly. That's completely reasonable. But how we treat people who are doing their jobs is not negotiable in my properties. "Of course," Vivienne said. "I completely agree. I'll speak to her." "I appreciate that," I said. "I also want to make sure the rest of the weekend goes well for Bree and Colt. I've asked Frederick to upgrade your family's accommodations for the night. Complimentary. I want this to be a good experience." She blinked. "That's very generous." "It's Bree's wedding weekend," I said. "She deserves to enjoy it." Then I went to find my sister. Bree was in the hallway outside the dining room, heels off, leaning against the wall with her phone in her hand. She looked up when she heard me coming and then looked back down. "Hey," I said. "Hey." I leaned against the wall next to her. We stood there for a second without talking, which is something we're actually good at. The particular silence of sisters who have been in the same rooms their whole lives. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" she asked. She wasn't angry. She sounded genuinely curious, the way you sound when a piece of a puzzle finally shows you the shape of the whole picture. You never asked what I did, I said. Not specifically. She looked at the floor. I thought you managed properties. Like, supervise staff or something. I do supervise staff, I said. I supervise about 400 of them. She laughed at that, a short, surprised laugh that was also kind of mortified. God, Tess. It's fine. It's not fine, I let them talk to you like, Bree. I waited until she looked at me. It's your rehearsal dinner. You're getting married in 2 days. None of tonight is what matters. She studied my face. Are you actually okay? I'm actually okay, I said. I'm also going to need you to let me know earlier if you're going to change the dessert course 3 hours before service. Renata is a genius, but she's not a magician. Bree laughed again, louder this time. That was Vivienne. She saw the original menu and decided chocolate wasn't elegant enough, and then Colt had to call me and I had to call. I know, I said. It's handled. She reached over and squeezed my hand. We stayed in the hallway a little longer than we needed to, which felt like the right amount of time. The next morning I was back at 7, reviewing contracts, when Frederick knocked and came in with 2 coffees and the expression of someone who had something to report. Marcus wanted me to give you this, he said, and set a small paper crane on my desk. Origami. Perfectly folded, made from a cocktail napkin, one of ours. I looked at it for a moment. Tell him thank you, I said. He also said, and I'm quoting, please tell Ms. Langford that she didn't have to, but I'm glad she did. I picked up the crane carefully. It was the size of a thumb, wings folded back like it was mid-flight. Give him next Friday off, I said, full pay. Frederick nodded and left. I set the crane on the windowsill next to the photo of the Columbus property, where it caught the morning light in a way that made it look like it was actually going somewhere. The wedding was 2 days later, in the ballroom downstairs. Bree looked the way people look when they're getting exactly what they wanted, which is a very particular kind of beautiful. Colt cried during the vows, which made Bree cry, which made my mother cry, which meant I was the only person in the front row who was not crying. I was thinking about the crane on the windowsill. I was thinking about the Columbus property, and the roof leak, and the 24-year-old woman grinning like she'd already won. I was thinking that being underestimated had cost me something, over the years. Evenings like last night, the weight of rooms where people had already decided what you were before you opened your mouth. But it had also given me something, the ability to watch, to see people as they actually were, rather than as they wanted to appear. To know with some precision who would stay and who would go, who was worth the effort and who was performing effort for an audience. The doorman who had sent me to the service entrance was no longer employed at the Harrington. Frederick had handled it that morning, quietly, before the breakfast service. The man had been warned twice before about his manner with guests. Last night had been the third. I had not asked Frederick to fire him. He had made that call himself because he knew what I expected and he knew where the line was. That was what good management looked like. Not someone who needed to be told every decision, but someone who had internalized the values deeply enough to act on them independently. Ainsley came up to me at the reception, glass of champagne in hand, with a different energy than she'd had the night before. Less performing, more genuine. I liked her better for it. I want to apologize, she said, for last night. The comment about tips was rude, and I knew it was rude when I said it. It's already forgotten, I said, which wasn't entirely true, but was true enough. Can I ask you something? Sure. The offer Vivienne made to Bree and Colt about helping them with a down payment, she pulled it this morning. I looked at her. I'm not saying that to be dramatic, Ainsley said carefully. I just thought you should know in case it affects anything. It doesn't, I said. They don't need it. She nodded slowly, and I watched her absorb that. Bree's going to be taken care of, I said. Whatever she needs, that was always true, it just wasn't visible. Ainsley looked at me for a long moment with an expression that was difficult to read, but wasn't unfriendly. You're very calm about all of this. I've had practice, I said. We clinked glasses. It wasn't the beginning of a friendship exactly, but it was an honest moment, which I'll take over a performed one almost every time. The reception went late. The cake was perfect. Renata had consulted on the dessert menu herself at my quiet request, and the result was a 4-tier lemon and elderflower that people were still talking about during the last dance. The flowers that didn't get used in the centerpieces? There had been a miscommunication about quantity and we'd over-ordered significantly. Went the next morning to the Riverside Care Center 4 blocks away, which I'd been quietly supporting for about 3 years. Nothing went to waste. The leftover station food, the appetizers that had been over-prepped for a cocktail hour that ran shorter than planned. All of it was boxed and driven over to the family shelter on Clement Street before midnight. Marcus oversaw the packing himself, apparently. On his night off, I found that out the following week, when Frederick mentioned it in a staff update like it was just a logistical footnote. But I thought about it for the rest of the day, about the paper crane on my windowsill and the man who'd folded it on a cocktail napkin in between being told his name tag was crooked by someone who had no authority to tell him anything, about what it meant to hold power quietly, to carry it without announcing it, to use it carefully, to make sure the people around you knew they were seen, not because it benefited you to see them, but because they deserved to be seen. My sister called me that Sunday from her honeymoon, which surprised me. Bree is not a phone call on vacation person. I just wanted to say thank you, she said, for all of it. And I'm sorry it took me this long to actually know what all of it was. You know now, I said. I do. A pause. Also, Renata's cake was genuinely the best thing I've ever eaten. Is there any way to get the recipe? I laughed. Absolutely not. But I'll see what I can do about getting you a cake for your first anniversary. Deal, she said. After we hung up, I sat for a while at my desk. The city below doing what it does, moving, not stopping. All those lives intersecting and missing each other and finding each other again. The crane was still on the windowsill. The Columbus photo was still on the desk. I thought about the doorman and his pointing arm, the service entrance, the marble floors I had argued for in a room full of people who did not know yet that my opinion was the one that would matter. I thought about how much of the story I would ever tell out loud and to whom, and whether the telling even changed anything. And then I picked up the quarterly review from Denver and got back to work, which is what I always do. Because the work is the point, and it always has been, and it always will be, even in the rooms where no one knows yet that I'm the one who built them. I've thought a lot about that night since it happened. Not with bitterness, I moved past that faster than people might expect, but with the kind of quiet clarity that comes when something finally shows you exactly what it is. The doorman who pointed me toward the service entrance wasn't a bad person. He made a fast judgment based on incomplete information and acted on it with more confidence than the situation warranted. That's a very human thing to do, but it cost him his job, not because I wanted revenge, but because it was the third time he'd done something like that to someone. The pattern was the problem. The night I walked in was just the night the pattern ran out of runway. That's the thing about consequences. They rarely arrive on the schedule we think they should. We watch people behave badly and nothing happens, and we start to wonder if the math is broken. But the math isn't broken. It's just slower than we want it to be. Vivienne spent an entire dinner performing importance, and by the next morning, the financial offer she'd been dangling over Bree and Colt had quietly disappeared. Not because I asked anyone to remove it, because people who lead with leverage tend to pull it the moment they realize it isn't working. That's not punishment. That's just what that kind of behavior does to itself eventually. What I keep coming back to is Marcus, a man who, while being told his non-existent name tag was crooked, stayed at his post, did his job, and then spent his night off making sure leftover food got to people who needed it. I didn't ask him to do that. Frederick didn't assign it. Marcus did it because that's who Marcus is. And who you are when no one's directing you is really the only version of yourself that counts. I've tried to remember that in my own work. The decisions I make when there's no audience, no upside, no obvious reason to do it the harder way, those are the ones that actually build something. I was 24 when I bought that first property. I had no business doing it. The roof leaked. The parking structure had structural concerns that the inspector described in a tone usually reserved for medical diagnoses. Every person I respected told me to walk away. I didn't, not because I was brave or brilliant, but because I had looked at the thing long enough to see what it could be under the mess. That's most of what I've learned about building anything. Patience with the ugly version while you work toward the real one. Bree called me from her honeymoon that Sunday. It was the first time in years she'd called just to talk. She thanked me and apologized and then asked about the cake recipe, which made me laugh in a way that felt like something releasing. I don't need my sister to have known what I was doing all those years. I needed her to know me, and I think she's starting to. That matters more than the rest of it. The crane Marcus folded from a cocktail napkin is still on my windowsill. I look at it most mornings. It reminds me that dignity isn't something anyone gives you. It's something you carry in, quietly, and set down where it belongs. And if the room doesn't recognize it at first, that's all right. It'll catch up.